In Sudan, rival forces are battling on the outskirts of the capital, undermining a truce in the nearly 2-week conflict. A UN official says that neither side is willing to negotiate, adding to the chaos. There's the release of prison inmates and also the whereabouts of former officials accused of war crimes. Naba Mohaddin has more.
Fragility and confusion continues in Sudan, in the capital Khartoum and other states, after news about freeing the prisoners of the federal prison in Kobar, northern Khartoum, and some of the regime, the former regime of al-Bashir. There is fears also of involvement of the former regime symbols in this war after Ahmed Haroun, which is one of the former main men or supporters of al-Bashir, who is accused of war crimes, genocides, and crimes against humanity in Darfur. He called on Islamists and jihadists to involve in this war, and he's calling for a prolonged fighting. On the ground, the fighting still continues in different parts of the capital Khartoum and other parts of the country, and many states announced a state of emergency and banned any monopoly of goods and commodities after the flow or influx of displaced people from Khartoum. So right now the fighting is around very essential areas and locations the RSF is trying to control, but the military is using air force. The fighting seems to be prolonged, and the ceasefire is repeatedly falling again, but there is calls for negotiations. It may pave the way for a compromise or a solution for this accumulating crisis that push hundreds of thousands of families to flee the war in Khartoum to other states or other countries, including Ethiopia, Eritrea, South Sudan, and Egypt. The situation is deteriorating, and it needs urgent and fruitful intervention by the international community to help restore calm and stability in the country again. Naba Mohaddin, CGTN, Al Jazeera State, Sudan.
A university student was among the first Egyptians to return from Sudan. His parents are relieved he's home and don't intend to send him back anytime soon. Here's Adel Al-Marouki.
After being surrounded by heavy fighting for about a week in Khartoum and taking a dangerous 45-hour-long road trip back to Egypt, Ahmed Abdullah is relieved to be back home. He has never appreciated the streets of his hometown Zifta as much as he does now after a horrific experience in Sudan. Admitted to dentistry school in the Sudanese capital in 2020, the now 20-year-old Egyptian has never seen stability in the African country. Yet April's fighting between the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support paramilitary forces took insecurity to a new level.
The streets became empty. When there was internet, we realized how deteriorated the situation was. Power cuts became the norm. We charged our phones at hospitals or mosques. Many people were dying. Bodies were thrown in the streets. Once, my friends and I saw the RSF forces. We were amazed. They were armed children among them, 14 or 15 years old. I couldn't believe my eyes. Some of them were not even Sudanese.
Ahmed was living in between the Sudanese military headquarters and the National Television building. That's where most of the fighting has been taking place. He filmed this video of his dorms getting hit to show his parents how intense the fighting was.
We stayed up until midnight. We couldn't sleep because of the frightening sound of the shelling. Whenever we got a chance to sleep, we tell each other that this time we might not wake up. We realized that we could die at any moment. A missile hit our building. One of our friends lost his arm. It was horrific.
Running out of food, water, and money, Ahmed and his fellow students suffered. Once the news about the first ceasefire was announced, they decided to leave Khartoum immediately, without any plan about where to go next.
Returning to Egypt was not an option. It's a 40 to 45 hours trip. We don't know what we could face on that long road. We decided to go to a nearby state, which was 3 hours away, and everyone told us it's much safer than the capital. From there, we managed to plan our trip back to Egypt. The road was full of torched vehicles, tanks, and checkpoints. The checkpoints for the armed forces let us pass peacefully. The ones by the RSF gave us a hard time.
Now back home among his family, the future of this young man and many Egyptian students in Sudan is uncertain. Their university degree must be completed in Sudan, but it's too dangerous to go back.
I knew Ahmed was in the middle of all that fighting. He was one building away, and that building later collapsed. Every time the communication was cut, every time I couldn't reach my son, my heart stopped. We don't want to go through this ever again. If I can't enroll my son into an Egyptian university, I'd rather have him quit dentistry than go back to Sudan.
Thousands are fleeing Sudan amid the on and off promises of a ceasefire. Egypt, Sudan's north neighbor, is one of the main stops in many foreigners' exit plans. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
For more about this crisis, I'm joined by Robin Renee Sanders. She is the former director for the Africa and the National Security Council under the Clinton administration. Good to see you and welcome to the show. You know, we have had hotspots in Africa. This is not the first time, but I feel like this is one that perhaps is slightly misunderstood because we don't know what each side really sort of stands for. And I think you're going to help us out here by giving us, how did we get to this point where we have these two factions and now there's seemingly chaos in the country?
I think you have to really look at the two generals, the two personalities. This is really about them wanting political and economic power. It's not for any humanitarian or democratic process that they look to put in place. These two gentlemen know each other well. They have fought together, particularly in Yemen, in support of Saudi Arabia. So they know each other really, really well. And they both have histories that are worrisome in terms of their respect for human life, for human dignity, and for a transition process toward democracy. So I think we have to be very blunt about what this is. This is about two men, generals, who want economic and political power, and whether or not they care about a transition, about democracy in Sudan, seems not to be on their agenda at all. So this is very different. Particularly, neither one of them are talking about having a peaceful resolution to their differences. It really is about what they want personally, politically, and economically.
I mean, we had this sort of fragile ceasefire that we have been reporting on the last couple of days, and I use the word fragile because sometimes we're not even sure if the information is going to be accurate, at least from the ground. But we have seen a lot of countries send in military assistance to at least evacuate their own citizens. So I'm going to try to look at that as a positive, that at least there's enough stability that countries can do that. How long do you think that we're going to have this window of stability or ceasefire last?
Well, there are two things. One, they're not looking to have a fight with another country, so therefore allowing people to evacuate in a hopefully peaceful environment is to their advantage. It's not out of benevolence at all. It's out of being strategic, not really wanting to injure the nationals of another country. So that's on the table first. The ceasefire, clearly, that's not. It's not a fixed point. As your reporter said, that fighting has continued. So therefore, the 72 hours, the last 72 hours of ceasefire has not held. You have fighting in downtown Khartoum, and if you look at all of the conflict in Sudan over the years, fighting has really never happened in the capital city of Khartoum. This is quite different. So it's urban warfare, it's attacking infrastructure, it's letting prisoners go that have been identified as war criminals in the past out of prison. They've destroyed all the clinics and the hospitals. And so it is a very, very different conflict than it has been before. And there doesn't seem to be a way out unless we have, I would assume, Saudi Arabia probably has the greatest influence on both of those men, because both of those men were in Saudi Arabia together, working with the Saudis in their conflict in Yemen. So I think that I'm not optimistic at this particular time, but we have to continue to push forward.
Yeah,
Robin,
I think that's part of the concern, right? Because in conflicts we see around the world, either there is a compromise, or there's a de-escalation and then a compromise, or there's an escalation where things go a little more nuclear, so to speak, where there's going to be more death, there's going to be more bloodshed, and there's going to be more questions and less answers. And I think part of the concern here is just hearing you talk. I'm concerned that the economic stability or the economic wants from either side, there's not going to be much assets left if you end up destroying the country and the infrastructure that I suppose provided some of those benefits. And the timeline is suspect at best because both sides are probably going to hold their ground fairly strong.
Yeah, I think that you have to look at the economic benefit in a kind of a different manner. The resources in Sudan, or oil and gold, they require a certain amount of refining and mining processes. So it's not your normal economic framework that's at hand here that they're trying to go after. They want to control resources. And those resources tend to be gold in this case, and also oil. And so it's not your normal circumstances where you're looking at, they care about infrastructure, they care about the well-being of the nationals of Sudan. That's not what this is about. It really is about what I said at the beginning, their personal quest for power and for economic power and for political power. And if they have that, then they control those two major resources, gold and fuel or oil.
Yeah, and of course there are consequences to the stability not only of Sudan but to the rest of Africa as well. So we will of course continue to monitor this. Robin, really appreciate your time for helping us better understand this.
Thank you.
All right.